Hello, today we are talking about inverse trig functions. Inverse trig functions are things that look like arcsin of x. Or you probably have also seen it as sine with this little -1 thing. So that's inverse sine. Arc cosine of x, or cos inverse, or arc tangent of x, or tangent inverse. And these also work for those reciprocal functions, so cosecant, secant, and cotangent. And basically, a inverse trig function is where you are trying to figure out what the angle is. So we are going to give you the value, and you have to figure out what the actual angle is itself. But there are some restrictions on the domain and range of these inverse trig functions. So sine, arcsine, you're either going to be in quadrant 1 or quadrant 4. So all students take calculus. Sine is positive in the first quadrant and negative in the fourth quadrant. So if your value for arcsine is positive, you're going to draw your triangle in the first quadrant. If your value for arcsine is negative, you're going to draw your triangle in the fourth quadrant. So the domain restriction would be -1 to 1. And your range, so if you're thinking about your values for y, so up here would be pi over 2, and down here would be 3 pi over 2 or negative pi over 2. If you're going in this direction, it would be negative pi over 2. So your range is going to be somewhere in between pi over 2 and negative pi over 2. So this is y equals arcsine of x, y equals sine inverse of x. Y represents your angle, and x is like the value. So arcsine is restricted. The angle is going to be between negative pi over 2 and positive pi over 2. All right, for cosine, cosine is positive in the first quadrant and negative in the second quadrant. This is restricted to the first and second quadrant for arc cosine. So again, your domain needs to be in between -1 and 1, which makes sense because over here at pi, cosine of pi, or sorry, at 0, cosine of 0 is 1, and over here at pi, cosine of pi is -1. So your value needs to be in between -1 and 1. So your range for your angle over here is pi, over here is 0, so your angle is going to be somewhere in between 0 and pi. And then tangent, arctangent is again same as arcsine, is restricted to the first and the fourth quadrant. So again, your domain is going to be in between, well, the domain is actually negative infinity to positive infinity, basically, because this is like undefined, 0, undefined, so it's like kind of everything. And the range is going to be in between negative pi over 2 and pi over 2. So really the domain is like kind of confusing. You just need to be able to know which ones, which quadrants you can draw your functions in. Our first example is to find arcsine of √3 over 2. So again, this could also be written as sine inverse of √3 over 2. They mean the same thing. So this is positive. So that means that since we're restricted to the first and the fourth quadrant, sine is positive in the first quadrant. I'm going to draw this triangle in the first quadrant. So sine is opposite over hypotenuse. My hypotenuse is 2. Here's my angle, and so this is √3. This is one of my special right triangles, so this is 1. And that would make this angle up here is 30, right here is 60. So the value is 60 degrees, but let's say we want this to be in radians. So sine inverse of root 3 over 2, or arcsine of root 3 over 2 is equal to pi over 3. So with arcsine, sine inverse, with these inverse trig functions, your answer is going to be an angle. I give you the value, and we're going backwards. Instead of me giving you the angle and you evaluate sine at that angle, I give you the value, we're going backwards, and we're trying to find the angle. So your answer for these is going to be an angle. Okay, our next one is, let's scroll down. Our next one is this is an example, cosine inverse of -1. So really the question is, where is cosine of theta equal to -1? What is the angle? What is the angle? That is what we're trying to figure out. Well, remember, we're restricted from 0 to pi. Cosine of 0 is 1. Cosine of pi is -1. So what angle makes cosine equal to -1? It's pi. So cos inverse of -1 is pi. That is your answer, is pi. Your angle is pi, 180 degrees. All right, next one. Arctan of -1. So this is negative, and tangent is restricted to the first and the fourth quadrant. If it's negative, we're going to put it in the fourth quadrant. So here's our triangle. This is technically -1 over 1, opposite over adjacent. And so that would be root 2. This is a 45, 45, 90 triangle. So this is 45 degrees. And if you remember, our range is restricted to -pi over 2 to pi over 2. So if you were thinking about this angle moving in the positive direction, this would be 315 degrees, or 7 pi over 4. Well, 7 pi over 4 is not in this inequality. It does not, it's like way outside, it's like way over here. So we have to think about this instead as negative pi over 4. So your answer is negative pi over 4. So when your right triangle ends up being in this fourth quadrant, you want to think of your angle going in the negative direction as opposed to the positive direction. Because if it's in the positive direction, then it's not going to be, your angle won't be in your range. But if you go in the negative direction, it is in your range. So the answer is negative pi over 4.